Hey guys, Thea here from That Sweet Tea Life, and today we're going to take a look at how to apply a paint wash. This is just another way to add interest and depth to your finishes, being as smooth or as textured as you prefer. Although you can create this effect with any style of paint, using a chalk or mineral style paint is definitely going to give you more depth, more texture, and be a little bit more fun to work with. Today we'll be using Authentico's vintage paint in antique turquoise as well as bright white. You'll also notice that I'm using a few other things, including a spray bottle filled with purified water. I use purified just so that it doesn't go stale over time. You'll also notice that I'm using a artist's brush for details, as well as my larger brush with fine bristles. Now, you can do this with any brush, but I will say if you want a smooth, streak-free type of wash, then make sure you're trying to use one of the brushes that have a lot of bristles with lots of very, very fine filaments at the end. To begin, I'm just slightly dampening my brush and working the moisture through. This is just going to help everything flow a little bit more evenly. The next thing is to take my water bottle and I'm going to spray the entire surface that I am working on. Now I don't want any drips or anything like that, but I do want to make sure that the surface is well saturated. So after I spray, I'm going to take my brush and just kind of work the water across the entire side. Once I know that all of the water is evenly distributed and I don't have any kind of dry spots or anything, then I can begin starting to add a little bit of paint. Now my base coat has been sitting here for 24 hours and you want to make sure that your base coat has got a good grip on the surface, and here's why. When you begin adding water to it, it's going to potentially reconstitute the paint and make it want to pull up. If you have anything pulling, stop what you're doing, lay a little bit more of your base color down if you need to, and wait. Give it another 4, 12, 24 hours, whatever you want to do to make sure that your base color is going to stay put. Then it's time to get to work and play. And the reason I say play is part of this is going to be an experiment. It's going to be a continuous ebb and flow between adding a little bit more water, adding a little bit more paint, and making everything move without catching anywhere. As you can see here, in some areas the paint's wanting to catch, and you don't want that to happen quite yet. You want to make sure that you have an even wash across the entire surface. So while I don't want drips, my job now is to continue to add a little bit of paint, add a little bit of water, until I have a nice even flow of the pigments across the base coat. Now, while I'm doing this, of course, I can concentrate the pigments in little areas that I know I want to add somewhat of a highlighted effect to. But the big thing is that I don't want drag. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm working in manageable sections that I know I'm able to complete in one little session. Now here you can see I'm basically just cleaning up the edges. I don't want to have too much paint there whenever I go to start on the wash on those surfaces. So I'm just going to take a little bit of water and I'm going to use my brush and a paper towel, and I'm going to simply just wipe over the surface and kind of remove the paint. As long as it hasn't been sitting there too long and allowed to dry and catch onto the surface, you're going to be fine. Just continue to work it gently until it goes away. Now, one of the keys to a really great paint wash is finding the balance between wet and dry. At this stage, my brush has gone from slightly damp to mostly dry. The surface has also gone from slightly damp to mostly dry. I want to continue to work it until everything is really, really dry, and this is why it's so important to have such a fine filament brush to work with. On to the details. Now using a number 5 filbert brush, you can use whatever little artist brush your heart desires. This is just one that I tend to like. I'm going to load up a little bit of the paint alone. My brush is slightly damp just to allow flow, but now it's about placing the paint in little areas that I think it really wants to catch on. This is going to be bottom surfaces, top edges, just anywhere that I want to add a little bit of an accent. And once again, it's the balance between wet and dry. You don't want it too wet, you don't want it to be drippy unless you're going for the drippy effect, but the point is to go ahead and lay down the white paint And then go ahead and begin smoothing it out at the edges so that it's all seamless. This just may be my favorite part of the process. This is where you get a little bit more artistic and really highlight the areas that you want. Additionally, this is where you can begin to incorporate different colors. This is a little bit more past the washing effect and more into the highlighting effect. As you continue to work here with your highlights, feel free to grab your larger brush and kind of smooth things out and pull the pigments through. Here you can really begin to develop it and make it as crusty or as smooth as you want to. Sometimes whenever you have more textured paint, this is a great time to kind of work from a wet brush technique to almost like a dry brush technique and catch the edges and add a little bit more interest. At this stage, my large brush is completely dry and I'm just using it to work the pigments that I'm laying down. If it's too wet, you're going to disturb what you've laid earlier and you don't want that to happen. And here you can see the difference between the white paint wash and no paint wash. While no paint wash is pretty, whitewash just adds a lot more interest. And here's the finished result. Now let's see what this looks like as we apply the techniques to a piece of furniture. As you can see, first of all, I take the cues from the furniture itself. Where there is a curve or a crevice, this is where you want to begin to kind of accent and utilize those little spaces to leave slight deposits of your paint wash. What's nice about working with these little small areas is there's much less of a worry of getting the water completely across the surface in an even area. Here we're just going to wet it and we're going to take some of the paint and begin working it in a way that makes sense for the area that we're working on. As you can see here, I'm using a flat angled brush. Now, instead of loading the entire brush up with paint, I'm actually only loading about 1/3 of it up. This allows for more blending and more shading across the surface because the back portion of the brush has no paint on it at all. Now I'm just taking that larger, dry brush, and we're going to continue to work that balance between wet to dry. Here, as it continues to dry, you can see that it's just smoothing out the surface and allowing the pigments to rest in those crevices. Now, as we continue to work down the leg, it's just a matter of picking up a little bit of the pigments and placing them in areas that make sense and smoothing it out. Continue to work the paint across the surface while keeping it wet and working it until it begins to dry. Now remember, this can be done with any color of paint you wish. You could start with a base color of a light blue and begin to wash with a dark blue or vice versa. You can also use black or dark browns for an antiqued look, and of course white gives you that coastal kind of whitewashed appearance. Your turn. I can't wait to see what you come up with. Be sure to share in one of the groups or on my page, or feel free to email me as well. Until next time, guys.